And thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar on how Hindu Dharma transformed America. Our guest speaker, our panelists, our faculty, our esteemed author is Philip Goldberg. Philji, nice to have you on and thank you for joining. We also have Ryan from Los Angeles, Ram from Dallas, and Ram from Brampton. Welcome. Balaji from Brampton. Welcome, welcome. Um, yeah, if you haven't filled out the poll, thank you. I will give you another quick second for that while we let some other folks join us. Let me introduce our guest today, Dr. Phil Goldberg is a spiritual counselor, public speaker, author of many books. He's been studying the world's spiritual traditions for more than 45 years, and he's been a
More than
practitioner.
50 now, Encore.
The intro is a little bit old. We will update the bio, sir. Teacher and author. He's actually an ordained interfaith minister, a spiritual counselor, meditation teacher. He's both illuminating and entertaining, a pleasure to have on our webinars. And he's teaching several different courses at HUA. And today's we're going to focus on how Hindu Dharma transformed America. He's literally written books on this topic in different aspects, and it's a pleasure to have him with us today. I see people want to get into the questions in the chat. We'll do that. Please put in the Q&A box. Krishnaji from Karnataka, glad to have you on. Chittaranjanji from Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for joining. Phil, how would you like to take this? Did we get any previous students on board to give a testimonial? If you are, let me know by raising your hand. Maybe we can incorporate you later on in the webinar. But Phil, how many times have you taught this course now at HUA?
This one, I think this will be the third or fourth time.
And I know we've done these webinars before, so maybe
Yeah.
keep it a little bit fresh. Each time you teach the course, we do these webinars, we continue to have new stories, new aspects of it.
Yeah.
Just take us through your journey. Maybe not the whole journey from working in the kitchens and then figuring out what you're gonna do, but maybe we can get into that if
Well,
the thought
I
process, the evolution.
discovered these precious teachings in the 1960s when I was a young man searching for truth and trying to figure out what life was all about, like a lot of other people my age back then who were very troubled and unsatisfied with the way things were presented to us. And so I discovered the teachings that were born in India, and I include in that Buddhism because my first exposure was that, and then Vedanta and yoga, and the whole breadth of and depth of these teachings. First through Westerners who were writing about it and speaking about it, and they, of course, were very influential. And then directly that led me to read the Gita and the Upanishads and all the other sources, and that led me on, onto the spiritual path that I've been on ever since. And then I noticed that it wasn't just me and my friends whose lives were transformed by Dharmic teachings and practices, but the influence kept spreading and it started showing up in places where you wouldn't recognize it if you didn't know what to look for. And over time, eventually I became a professional writer, and I started to realize India is affecting America in ways most people don't recognize, but it was transforming. It was having an influence on healthcare, on psychology, on academia, on neuroscience, on the arts, and all through all these disciplines and streams, uh, more and more people were being influenced by these teachings, and in many cases didn't even know it. But it changed the way they saw the world. It changed the way they understood themselves and their own spiritual inklings. And it started to show up in data about how people understood religion and spirituality. So I actually proposed a book on the subject in the 80s. You know, we sometimes we feel we're ahead of our time. In this case, I really was, because we couldn't find any publishers who were interested in it in the 80s. But 20 years later, one of the divisions of Random House bit on it. It was actually an editor's idea, and they found me. And so that led to the publication of American Veda in 2010. And that was the beginning of my public expression of what I had observed. And Ankur is right. Over time, things change. And if I were writing that book now, it would be the same book, but it would have a different last chapter, because a lot has happened in the 13 years since it was published. And one of the things that has happened since the explosion of hatha yoga, the increase, manifold increase in research on meditation and yoga practices. These things have grown. New gurus have come, new discoveries. But to me, one of the main things that's really become obvious since American Veda was published was the people here on this webinar, most of you, people in America of Indian descent, of Hindu descent, institutions like HUA, temples in all the major population center, prominent Hindu Americans in the public eye. All of this is contributing to the further expansion of what I wrote about in American Veda, which to me is one of the most important phenomena in American history, certainly in the history of American religion and spirituality. It's a major paradigm shift in how Americans understand and practice and think about their spirituality. And that's measurable and observable. So this course, like my book, but I can do so much more in this medium than you could do just in a written word. You can show videos, you can show pictures, you could play audios of main players. And so that's what we do in this course, taking you through the entire history, going back more than 200 years, for how these teachings started to come to America, how they influence people over time, how the different ways it gets transmitted, the subtle ways, the obvious ways, all the gurus and swamis and yogacharyas who came here, all the Westerners who helped to promote and propagate the teachings in a responsible way. Also, the issue of appropriation and the misuse of Hindu Dharma, that's also part of the story. But for the most part, this is the story of East coming to West and transforming the West.
Yeah,
Hope that makes sense.
yeah, that kind of puts us here in this webinar. So there's so many aspects to, and some people are asking the role of this sampradaya or that sampradaya, this guru, because that's how people connect.
Yeah.
Who did they follow, who makes sense to them, why do they connect with them. So maybe you can go over how in your course and how you get into these different lineages or sampradayas, and
Yeah.
if you want to get into a timeline and who affected whom, but that's always kind of an interesting overview. And then of course how you fit yourself into there.
Well, yeah, and this is the structure of American Vedas is kind of similar. The primary means of transmission were the prominent emissaries from India, the gurus and swamis and so forth, who came here. Some had a bigger impact than others. The collective impact of all the sampradayas, all the institutions, all the teachers, and in the case of most of them who have long since passed, how well their followers and successors have carried on the traditions is also a part of it. But of course, it begins with Swami Vivekananda in 1893, and I go into all of these in the process of the course. I don't want to go into details now, but Vivekananda, then in 1920, Yogananda, then in the 1960s, in the post-war years, when the counterculture and the baby boomer generation came of age, that's when the big explosion happened. The role of celebrities and music, because when the Beatles took up transcendental meditation, they made Maharishi Mahesh Yogi a global phenomenon. I go into all that. That led to scientists researching meditation practices. That had a huge impact. So Prabhupada, Muktananda, Swami Satchidananda, there's so many, I don't have to name them all. You know who they are. And then in the modern world, Amma and the so-called hugging saint, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, Sadhguru, all these people continue that process. But one of the important things to keep in mind is it's not just them. They had an impact on Westerners, some of whom were very famous or became very famous, and they had a voice, they had a platform, and they transmitted these teachings through their own work, their scholarship, their talent as writers of fiction or as filmmakers or as musicians or as academics, scientists. All of these people whose lives were impacted by the teachers who came here, then in turn absorbed the teachings, integrated it into their lives, and expressed it in their own disciplines and with their own expertise. That's an important factor. It's also important to realize that it started long before any gurus ever came here. When translations of the Gita and responsible commentaries on Hinduism and Buddhism started to come into America in the early part of the 19th century, especially, and it affected prominent Americans like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thoreau and others in the 19th century, long before they ever met. These people never met anyone from India, but they read the books, and those books had a big impact on them. And they, in turn, had a big impact and continue to have a big impact on people who read their books. And that's how it flowed, and that's how it was transmitted. And so the course tells the whole story, including some profiles of all the gurus.
Nice. And so
Ankur,
there's
is that Arunachala behind you?
No. This is kind of
This is
Yosemite.
our Arunachala.
That's our nutshell. Okay. Nice. Yeah. As you talk about the different gurus and the paths they set, the reverberations they had, the way it paid forward. Um, I'm kind of, and again, from the Hindu University of America perspective, kind of the institutions, right? The way that the individuals, regardless of their medium, and there's so many ways that you have this one course, How Hindu Dharma Transformed America, and right now you're teaching across the universe as well
Yeah.
through a whole different lens of how Hindu Dharma, but just a continuation of what you were saying. And
Yeah,
so, in
and
addition to the
actually,
individuals,
the current course about the arts came about because of the Hindu Dharma in America course. I devote one session to the arts, and everybody wanted to hear more, so we created a whole course about the arts. But that's one very important means of transmission. People wrote novels in which I'm sitting here, virtually with Arunachala behind me, where Sri Ramana Maharshi used to be. Uh, there was a best-selling novel in America called The Razor's Edge. It was made into an Academy Award-winning movie in the 1940s. Um, the guru character in that novel was based on Ramana Maharshi, and that's how these things spread. I read that book when I was in college, and it had a big impact on me. So
and then my question kind of on institutions. What are some of the major, like beyond individuals, some institutions, and again, contextualize what HUA is trying to do and how throughout your journey you've seen different institutions come up and down and where we fit into this, and potentially where our audience or attendees can plug in as students or other ways of involving
oh
themselves
yeah.
in this kind of
Well,
transformation.
all the gurus and swamis that I mentioned left be if they had any impact at all, because a lot of teachers from India came and they spent a little time and then went back to India. No one hears about them, even if they affected a few people. But the ones who spent time here, the ones who had a foothold here, and some made America their home. Yogananda made America his home, spent most of his adult life here. Satchidananda made America his home. Others just would come and go, but they established institutions that carried on their work. The institution that Swami Vivekananda started you all know the Ramakrishna Mission in India. Here in America, he started the Vedanta Society. Well, that's still going strong. It's 120 years now, 130 years, close to anyway. Um, and some of the swamis in the Vedanta societies in different cities in America are still having a tremendous impact. And now, because of YouTube and the internet, they're seen by many more people. I just interviewed for my podcast Swami Medhananda, who's a wonderful scholar and Vedanta teacher from that sampradaya. Swami Sarva Priyananda in New York, who was, I've interviewed a number of times. They're still having a big impact. Yogananda's institution, he passed in 1952, but his organization remains, and breakaway organizations teaching what he taught in his name. And one of the interesting things especially for Hindu people, to people born into Hinduism, to appreciate and is that you all know this, but Hinduism is not a monolithic thing. There's so much diversity in it. And if you look at the teachers who came here, they all had a different orientation. Some were jnanis, some emphasized karma yoga, some were bhaktas. Obviously, Prabhupada was a bhakta, and they introduced kirtan and, celebratory use of music and everything into the mix. Others were more austere and they emphasized meditation, and others emphasized yoga, asana, and classical yoga structures. Some, like Muktananda, introduced Kashmir Shaivism. So there are different emphases and they attracted different people. But if taken together, there's a broad range of the diversity that you see in India itself represented in America now, and in the different institutions, different programs. And of course, one of the other things is we all know there's a certain amount of Hindu phobia, and we all know there's misrepresentation of Hindu teachings in schools, but there's also a great number of professors who were people. I didn't go into academia, but many of my contemporaries who discovered these teachings and had gurus and went to India and lived in ashrams later went to graduate school, and they're teaching comparative religion or Hinduism or whatever it's called in their university, and they're doing it well. They're doing it responsibly, and that's another development that is important to recognize. The teachers who came here often empowered Westerners to teach in their name and trained them to do so. That's a rather, an unorthodox thing to do. And in many cases, it backfired because not everybody they qualified to teach did so responsibly. But that started to change the landscape of American spirituality. You have all these yoga teachers, you have American-born swamis, uh, people running the organizations that the gurus left behind. And that's another important factor in this to take into account.
Very nice. I think you summed it up really well. Like 2 courses, the context of it, what you've done, and how you're teaching it. So I think we summed it up. Usually there's about 9 people. This is your first webinar, but some of our previous webinars, you've had the PowerPoint and you've gone through the slides or the whole arc of your story, and then and then you covered a lot of it. So going forward right here, let's take some questions from the audience. I see some hands raised in who's this? And I don't know if we have any students of your course. Love to get somebody who's taken a course, because I can share the results one more time. A couple new folks, but a lot of folks who've been in courses or in the program. 5 enrollees. Thank you for joining. And if I can, I'll pivot to some of the questions. And Rakeshi and you touched on this. Rakeshi is kind of curious on your educational background, and you touched on it. You yourself didn't go into academia, but you had
Right.
friends who did, and you kind of learned through experience and
Yeah.
with the gurus themselves.
I have to say, my discovery of Hindu Dharma led me to drop out of graduate school because I was in a sociology program, but I wasn't finding the answers for my own personal needs and growth and inquisitiveness in graduate school. And I was busy, reading the Gita and other things when I was supposed to be doing graduate work. And finally I stopped. So my education in all this is outside of academia, although I've learned a great deal wading through academic books and getting to know academic scholars, some of whom you, of course, know. Um, but on a more personal note, since people asked, I experimented and read a lot and did whatever I could. And then sometime after the Beatles put transcendental meditation and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi on the map, I got into that. It became the central element of my sadhana. And I became a teacher of that and spent a good deal of the 70s teaching in that lineage and that organization. So that was my beginning. And then my curiosity and my independence carried me to look into the broader range of things. So as a non-academic researcher and scholar, I try to be very responsible. But as I joke with my academic friends, I'm a professional writer, not a professional scholar. And so you can actually read my books and enjoy them.
Yeah. Not a textbook, but a narrative and a story.
Right, right.
Engaging. Very good, very good. Shina's kind of got an interesting personal question. It's do you believe in rebirth and life after death, like the whole reincarnation? And do you believe you had a life before this one? But just to expand on that, right? The way that reincarnation plays in, and that such a complicated, deep idea that I think has been fundamental to how people think about life and connect with others, and maybe tracing that whole idea through
Yeah.
the centuries and how that's penetrated American society.
Well, it's interesting how many I haven't seen any recent studies, but when I wrote American Veda, I found out that more than 20%, close to 25% of Americans believe in reincarnation, including some unlikely people like the novelist Norman Mailer. It was really mind-boggling. And I bet if somebody did a survey now, it would be an even bigger number because it's related to other things. And this is another important element of it. Think of how many times in reading newspapers or watching the news on television or seeing a sitcom or a movie, you hear the word karma. It's part of the vocabulary now. Where did that come from? It just found its way into people's awareness, and it made sense to people. The notion of karma, they may not have a sophisticated understanding of it. They may misunderstand it in certain ways, but the core, the notion that actions have an impact and they come back to us. This resonated with people who may not know anything else about Hinduism or Hindu Dharma, but the concept of karma means something to them. You hear the word guru, you hear the word mantra. These things seep in. When I started to meditate, everybody thought I was nuts. I'd be with my family and I'd say, "Oh, can you wait 20 minutes to start dinner? I want to go meditate." They thought they were just glad I wasn't a hippie dropout, but they couldn't relate to that. But now think of it. My healthcare provider sends out newsletters and they tell me I should do yoga and learn to meditate to help with stress reduction and so forth. This is part of mainstream life now. And so are terms like karma. And so for many, many people is the notion of past lives and subsequent lives. The question was, do I believe it? Yes. And as I always tell people, I can't prove it. And I'm a very pragmatic guy. And one of the reasons Hindu Dharma has caught on in America is that most Americans are pragmatic people. And the gurus who came here never said, "Oh, you have to believe what I'm telling you. And if you don't, you'll go to hell." That's what they rejected in church, most people. The guru said, "Here's some teachings from our ancient past. Here's how to understand them." They come alive when you engage in certain practices, such as meditation and pranayama and kirtan and all that. Do the practices and see if they work. It was very empirical, very pragmatic. And that's what appealed to me back in the day. And so I'm still very pragmatic and I like evidence, and the teachings hold up to evidence. Reincarnation, we can't prove, but I lean in that direction. And if I'm surprised by that the afterlife is something different from what I imagined, I'll let you know.
Great. We have a couple hands up, four hands actually specifically, and we have quite a few questions ranging the gamut on specific about what you believe, expanding on some concepts we touched on, uh, deep dives into historical questions, and then of course, how do I explain Hinduism to an American in 2 minutes? I often struggle where to start and where to stop.
Yeah.
Yes, we all do. It
Do you
is
want me to take some of these questions, or do you want to choose them?
yeah, so your call, sir. However you want to proceed. I do have four hands up. Shashika G was kind of early, so maybe take
Okay,
get a question or two, and then we'll have
sure.
Shashika G unmute and share. And of course, that first poll was the first one. And I think this is how, and we'll take some questions on courses and all that, but I definitely want to just put this the poll up because this is kind of how you go through your course, right? You engage in a presentation, you talk about a certain amount of topics, and then you take questions, and then
Yeah,
you
yeah,
go where the conversation goes. And so
yeah.
in that way, if you're interested in enrolling in this course, let us know. We'll do that follow-up, and let's see where your questions take us. Phil?
Do you want me to take questions that are written in the
Yeah,
Q&A?
any
Well,
couple that you
here's
want
an
to start?
interesting one. Somebody, Samir, said, do the sampradayas work in silos like in India? Yeah, that tends to be the case historically. They're insulated from one another and they appeal to certain people. I'm happy to say I see some of that breaking down. I see interactions among the different groups more than I did in the past. And I think that's healthy and I hope it continues. But in the earlier days, I mean, maybe the teachers got together once in a while, and all that. I remember learning when I wrote a biography of Yogananda, and I learned that, he was in LA when he was living the years he lived in LA, he was down the road from Swami Prabhavananda at the Vedanta Society. And they were both Bengalis, and they would get together every once in a while to speak Bengali and eat Bengali food. But the organizations didn't interact publicly. And that tends to be the case. They're very specialized. But I hope that that changes. The other thing that's siloed that I hope changes, and we're doing it tonight because I'm here. Um, there are so many American-born yogis who, they're not born into Hinduism. They don't identify as Hindu as such, but they are Hindu in practice and certainly yogis in practice. And I would like to see more interaction among the Hindu American community, the people of Indian ancestry who were born into the tradition, and the people who are adopters of the teachings. When I see them interact, it's a beautiful thing, and they learn from one another because you're coming from different places, but embracing the same teachings and same practices. Um, Somebody asked about the term American Veda. That's the title of one of my books, the book that explains this history. And I chose it. It's not I got a Swami in India when I was speaking there once attacked me for stealing the Vedas, saying that America has its own Vedas. No, that's not what it meant. It just means, it was meant to capture the notion that Americans are, embracing and adopting the the traditional teachings that come from the Vedas. Uh,
Great. Let's have Shashika G voice his question, and after him, Chandra G. If you can unmute, yeah, go ahead.
Hello,
Yes, we can hear you.
hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Good evening, both of you. My first question is Kashmiri Shaivism is part of this course? And is how to, should I repeat? It is in question answer. I have written in question answer. Is Kashmiri Shaivism is a part of this course? Is Hatha Yoga is the teaching from Shaivism?
Anka, could you,
Yeah,
I
so
couldn't
are you
hear it
going to
well.
cover Kashmiri Shaivism in the course? I don't think, well, yeah, go ahead, Phil. Like that.
The course isn't about the teachings themselves. We get into it a little bit, but it's mainly about how the teachings and what aspects of the teachings, how they affected American culture.
That is
So
true. That is
when
true.
I
That is
talk
true,
about
sir.
Swami Muktananda, I will mention Kashmir Shaivism, but I won't go into detail about it. That's not the purpose of the course.
Oh, it is. I ask you whether it is a part of the course. Shaivism, Kashmiri Shaivism.
To the extent Kashmir Shaivism has had an impact on Americans, yes. But I won't go into, how Kashmir Shaivism might differ from Advaita Vedanta and all that. That's not what the purpose of the course is. But there are, especially through Swami Muktananda and Lakshman Ju, there are many, many Americans who have embraced Kashmir Shaivism and whose lives were transformed by the teachings.
All right. Do you want to ask another question?
Reincarnation. In beginning of this webinar, you said about Buddhism, Vedanta, and Bhagavad Gita. We started with that. So how these two different schools? Buddhism is different, is an orthodox school, and Hinduism is Hinduism orthodox and Buddhism unorthodox school. So how this reincarnation differs in these two schools?
Just
Anka,
how
could
does
you summarize the question?
reincarnation differ across different
In
schools,
Buddhism and
Buddhism and
Hinduism.
Hinduism specifically?
Yeah, that's not part of the course. I mean, I know there are said to be differences. I think they're less different than people think they are,
Mm.
but that's not part of the course, really.
Great. All right, Chandrakanchi.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's very nice. Perhaps because of this apparent confusion, perhaps you might want to give a little bit more detailed explanation what your course is going to be about, what is its scope, and so on like that.
If you read, yeah.
Did you understand what I said?
I think so. I think you did, yeah.
Thank you.
The course is about how the teachings and primarily which aspects of the vastness of Hindu Dharma came to America and how it changed American life, American culture. And I will show the ways this happened. We'll talk about all the gurus who came, what they did when they came, how they did what they did. And then we'll talk about philosophers, scientists, psychologists, and others who embrace the teachings. This is history, an important piece of history. And as far as I'm concerned, if I were born into Hinduism and didn't know the extent to which my heritage had influenced America, I would want to know. And my experience is when people in India or people of Indian descent here in America discover how much the teachings have influenced American culture, it becomes it's eye-opening, and it becomes a source not just of pride, but I think it makes people feel more at home here.
Um, a little bit more question about it. Is it this going to be a graduate level course?
A what?
A
Oh,
graduate level course, and how the impact that you're talking about in America, about how about the academia in America, it has impacted that. Thank you.
Ankur, you could address the graduate and all that part.
So great questions, Chandrakantji. Thank you for bringing it back to the course. I dropped details of the course in the chat. You can click and see from the course learning outcomes. But no, it is not part of the graduate program, but it is part of the certificate program in Hindu studies. So that certificate program is a nice set of courses that you can choose from, including Phil's course, that allows you to be clear and confident in your understanding of Hinduism from many perspectives, because you can't get it all in one webinar. It's very difficult to explain in 2 minutes. But as Phil has said, this exploration has turned into multiple courses on, again, that idea. And thank you for, again, refocusing that question on how Hindu Dharma transformed America through these different individual stories, actions, and then its implications through all these ways. So not a graduate course. If you want to get into more, the second half of that, Phil.
Okay.
What
thank
was
you.
the second?
Thank you, Uncle.
Okay, good. Thank you, Chandrakantji. Okay.
What was the second part of the question? I can't remember.
No, that's about it. Actually,
Oh, okay.
the reason I'm a graduate student, and at the very beginning, I was informed that I must take graduate level courses to receive credits. If I take a certificate level course and I invest resources in that, I may not get the credit for that. That's the reason I asked. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And glad that you were a graduate student at HUA. Again, the institution is paying it forward, looking forward to having more of you join us in whatever capacity you can, if it's a community education, as a graduate student, or just an attendee of these webinars. Any other questions jump out at you, Philji? I think we have 2 more people who raised their hand, and I can
Let's
go to
hear
them
them.
after you take. Okay. So we have, who's next? Gerald and Murali from Austin. So you 2 are up next. If you can unmute yourself. Who do we have? Both are...
Uncle, I am unmuted. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Murali from Austin.
Yes, Murali ji, go ahead.
Yeah. The question I have is, if we believe in karma and not believe in rebirth, it doesn't work together, right? So if Americans believe only in, say, karma and not rebirth, how do we, yeah, exactly. How do we explain the birth and the all the all the variations in life, right? So can you please talk about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. That is a good question, because really, if you look into, try to really fully comprehend karma, it can't work without reincarnation. But for a lot of people, karma is just shorthand for some kind of cosmic justice. So Taylor Swift has a song called Karma, and Alicia Keys has a song called Karma. And if you listen to it, and if you see how I see it in the sports. I'm a big sports fan, and I see the word karma showing up. Oh, it's the Lakers' karma that this happened, and people, it's a naive and superficial understanding. But if people use it, it must resonate in some way, that there's some way that things turn out to be fair. And in America, they're very accustomed to say, you reap what you sow, and what goes around comes around. And so karma fits into that. But if you listen to the lyrics of some of these songs, it's all about people who misbehaved and now they're getting what's coming to them. They don't, you never hear that, about good karma and things like that. So for many people, it's naive and superficial, just as, for many people, yoga is just a way of, stretching or being healthier. But for many people, these are entry points, and then they go deeper and they question, and it becomes something bigger. And before you know it, their lives have changed. And that's how a lot of this has happened. Back in the day when the first studies on meditation came out, uh, at the time, it was mostly, young people, counterculture people taking up transcendental meditation, going to Yogananda's group, going to Prabhupada or whatever. But once scientific research came out, it started to go mainstream. And that
Yeah.
was a wonderful thing.
To be
But
honest,
the downside is some people, it was just a way to lower your blood pressure or to have less anxiety. Just as now going to a yoga class might mean just a way of, having a good exercise for an hour. But for some people, it becomes more. It's a glimpse. It's a taste of something deeper, and they want to know more. And that's how these things happen and how culture changes and individuals change.
that was a wonderful explanation. Thank you very much. And in fact, you covered yoga because yoga is such a badly misunderstood word that they think it's only physical, but
Yeah.
it is so much more deeper, so much more
Right.
deeper.
But
So
one of the things I emphasize in the course, just as in places like this, those of us who care about these things, we have a responsibility and we have an opportunity to educate people about these things. I meet people all the time. Oh, yeah, I do yoga. What does it mean? It means they stretch and bend a little bit. And I say, there's a lot more to it than that. Oh, yes. And so, you should look into that. And here's a book and here's whatever. And that's, I think, a role that Hindu Americans can play very well as they interact with people in school, at work, and so forth. People will change. I know there's a big concern about misconceptions about Hinduism in academia and in the lower school systems. Gradually, that will change because the truth is the truth and people are open to hearing it. And I see that happening. I see it happening in universities.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. But looks like you will be covering this in the class too, this part of aspect of what we discussed.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'll join. I would love to join. Yeah. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Muraliji. Yes.
Thanks.
Christy?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Go ahead, Christy.
Oh, my question is, Professor Phillips, you mentioned that there are some professors or teachers now teaching in colleges who were influenced by something, went to India, learned in the ashrams, and now they're teaching something or the other, comparative religion. Do you have any references like that? Because most of the literature that I've come across, not too much, but in taking my courses with the HUA and reading the references they provided, most of that is about religion taught at the universities or in the schools is not very complimentary of Hinduism. So
I get it.
If there is such professors who are teaching this thing,
Yeah.
refers.
And unfortunately, you get a lot of people in academia who maybe they have a doctorate in philosophy and someone says, why don't you teach a course in comparative religion? They don't know what they're talking about.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know that. I know somebody who is a Christian minister. He has great respect for the world, other traditions. He taught at divinity school. He doesn't know anything. He has misconceptions about Hinduism. He doesn't mean to misrepresent it, but he just doesn't know.
That's what
But
here
there
we
are
talk.
others, and maybe I don't know what the proportion is. There are others. I have a friend who was a disciple of Muktananda back in the 70s. He went on and got a doctorate, and he's been teaching in a university in Texas for decades now. And those people who take his courses have a much different understanding than the people who take it from somebody who doesn't know it. But this has always been the case. If you were lucky enough in the 1960s to take a comparative religion course with Houston Smith, who was a great scholar of religion and studied with swamis from the Vedanta Society, then you would get a very different picture than
the
if you
name you
took
said?
it with somebody else. And it's similar now, but there's more of them. There's more people, going to graduate school, teaching responsibly. I know people who are, now retired who did this their whole careers, but they're not necessarily famous, but they did a good job. Look at Christopher Chappell at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. He's been doing wonderful things. He had a guru as a young man in the 70s, not a very famous guru. And Chris went on to become a PhD in theology and comparative religion. He started the first master's degree program, credited master's degree program in yoga studies. And it's the real thing. It's the real yoga, and they study the real texts. And people are well educated in that. And the people graduating that program move on and they have an influence. So there's people like that in pockets, throughout academia. And unfortunately, there are also ignorant people. But you know what? A lot of ignorant people are teaching Christianity and Judaism and Islam too. And that's a shame, but it also does happen.
Yeah, I mean, one observation I have, I've been in the US for 53 years now, that the mainstream America is not familiar with Hindus.
You're right.
Do that.
But
They're at least familiar. They may not know the Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Buddhism for that matter.
Yeah.
But they haven't heard of the word Hindu.
No, and if they have, they have a misunderstanding.
That's right.
To this day, there's people teaching classes who, when they talk about Hinduism, the first thing they talk about is caste. And it's not a healthy
despite
thing.
all the gurus coming here and all these teachings going
Yes,
on,
but what's interesting
not having
is
effect on mainstream America. That's what I mean.
It has had a big effect on mainstream America, but people don't necessarily think of it as Hinduism. They think of it as yoga. They think of it as Vedanta. They think of it as being spiritual, but not religious.
Well,
That's more than 25% of people in America identify as being spiritual, but not religious. They don't follow the religion they grew up in. They are searching in a broad way. That would be impossible if the gurus hadn't come here and provided teachings that would allow people to be independent about their spiritual search. They don't necessarily think of themselves as Hindu. They may go see a teacher and not even think of that person as a Hindu. They just are learning how to meditate or learning about karma or learning about
the yoga schools,
Vedanta philosophy or something.
there are yoga schools everywhere.
Yeah.
Go to every shopping center, there's a yoga school. But they don't even mention that it comes from India. I mean, it's very unfortunate.
Because they don't want.
Not there.
Yeah, and see, it's complicated, but people think of Hinduism as a religion. And a lot of people in America just don't want to have anything to do with religion. So but they'll be happy to take up yoga and read a book on Vedanta and hear Professor so-and-so speak about Indian philosophy, but they don't want to identify with a religious word. It's an interesting phenomenon and a challenge.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy. Appreciate you and your consistent support of HUA.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Next, Shakuntala ji.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is of a different type. Actually, I am very much interested in learning the Bhagavad Gita, and that I want to learn through the Hindu University. I want to learn Bhagavad Gita through Sanskrit and Sanskrit through Bhagavad Gita. And I do remember I read somewhere that this type of course is available with you all.
Yeah, it's actually a whole certificate program. I'll be sure Pragyaji follow up with you. I don't know if you're familiar with Pragyaji. She's our director of registrations, but this is a big program. I think 2 years, and line by line, you learn Sanskritam and the Bhagavad Gita. Yep, that's a separate course and program. Shakuntalaji, I'll make sure that
I'm looking forward to learning that, because that's my keen interest at the moment.
Great. And if you
I'm of course very happy to know so much about what the Hindu University is propagating, and I would sometime perhaps get into that also, but just now my interest is that only.
Great. I sent you a quick message. Email me or let me have your email and we will connect you. And Phil G. Go ahead.
djodan@gmail.com.
Okay, I got it. Okay. And Phil has been part of this, right? Different people want to learn different aspects of Hinduism, as we were just talking about. Disassociate it, compartmentalize it, silo it, yoga, the whatever they're doing with yoga, right? But mindfulness and Ayurveda and diet, like subject by subject, issue by issue. And so I'm glad that you're teaching at HUA, you're getting into this, and before you know it, you will have another course on this next aspect as well. All right. Thank you so much, Shakuntalaji.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. We have quite a few more questions in the Q&A box. There's it's still coming. Philji, do you want to take a quick scroll through and see any that you want to take on? And then we're going to have to wrap up. We're near the top of the hour. If you
I'll look them over, but if you see anything that stands out to you, Ankur, please just take it.
Yeah. So again, I've dropped details of the course in the chat. Please take a look through. It's going to be this time. That's the reason why we had the webinar at this time. It's going to be Wednesdays at 5 p.m. starting on April 17th, about a month ahead. And so now's a good time to enroll in this course. One of many we offer at HUA, one of a few that Phil Goldberg teaches at HUA. But whatever your questions are, please ask them. We'll try to get you an answer and plug you in. But of course, it's hard to get the depth and the breadth of answers that you want in a short time.
Here's a question. Do you know whether these mystics have influenced Judaism? One of the segments of one of the 10 lessons is about how it's affected how Hindu Dharma has affected mainstream religion in America, which is mostly Christian, of course, and it's had a big impact on American Christianity, but also on American Judaism. If you Google it, you'll see a guy named the Kirtan Rabbi who takes Kirtan form. That would be familiar to all of you with Indian instruments, but he does it in Hebrew. He's a rabbi. That's a phenomenon. There are Jewish forms of meditation, but one of the things that's interesting, the presence in America of the swamis and gurus and yoga masters had a big impact on so many people that Christian and Jewish leaders said, what's going on here? Do we have anything like meditation and these practices of the Hindus and the Buddhists that we can offer? And it has led to a revival of Jewish mysticism and Christian, what's called contemplative Christianity. And you're finding people being essentially yogis, but in a Christian context and a Jewish context. And to a certain extent, Islam too, because it's given a greater legitimacy to the Sufi aspect of Islam. And it's, of course, affected all these people who don't want to identify with a religion at all, but they can be spiritual by studying, practicing methods that apply to any lifestyle and any point of view. And that's what Hindu Dharma has introduced into America. People don't have to be Hindu. That's what the gurus essentially said. You don't have to, I'm not here to convert you. You don't have to be a Hindu. If you want to be a Christian, fine. Be a deeper Christian. Learn from our tradition. It'll make you a deeper, more complete Christian in the way that Jesus might have approved of. And that's a phenomenon. I know people, who are essentially Hindu Jews and Hindus and Hindu-oriented Christians. They're yogis, essentially. And we go into that more deeply in the class. And there's data about this, about the change in American spirituality. And if you look at the direction that it's changed, you say, oh, this starts to more and more resemble the core teachings of Hinduism. And that's how the teachings have influenced America.
Very nice. I guess my camera went out of whack a little bit, but that was Ellie. Thank you for that question and getting into that. Two last questions from Ryan Anderson. I'm just going to read it because they're kind of interesting. Do you believe, and maybe you just touch on this, right? Do you believe that the study of Sanatana Dharma by some of the founding fathers of the United States of America, such as Thomas Jefferson, is a coincidence, or is it a part of their motivation? Right?
I've never. I would love to know more. It's clear that I mentioned this in American Veda. There are letters between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams that they were both reading Hindu texts, but they're dated toward the end of those guys' lives, long after they were founding fathers and young revolutionaries. So whether the revolutionary period and the writing of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, whether they were exposed to these teachings at that time, I don't know. But maybe some were. But they certainly, some of them were later in life because, the texts and the commentaries about Hinduism and also about Buddhism, they weren't there, right at the beginning. Think of the colonial period. Most people, if they were exposed to anything about Hinduism, it came through the, colonial, the British Raj, and it wasn't very complimentary. But then other people started going to India and saying, oh, look, there's some beautiful teachings in this. This is rich. This is deep. And that started to filter in. And that's what Emerson read. And that's, the first translation of the Gita didn't come until the, 19th century. So it took a while.
So he's got two more parts. The second one, like you got into karma about reap what you sow, you get your comeuppance. He's wondering if there's a notion around divine coincidence is a similar kind of concept.
Well, you see that a lot in sort of New Age teachings and Western metaphysics, as well as people influenced by Hindu Dharma. That everything has a pattern, that everything fits together, everything's connected. That point of view is more and more mainstream and more accepted. It's it's trivialized and misunderstood.
Divine coincidence, and also manifest what you think, put out
Yeah,
the universe what
manifest,
you're gonna
you
get,
are
out
what
the
you think, you
universe,
can have
help you all
whatever you
that, right?
want. You know,
Collaborate with the universe or conspire with the universe is
as
working.
you know, it's very easy to take a deep and profound teaching, something from there are fascists who read the Bhagavad Gita. Some of the Nazis thought they saw in the Gita and the Mahabharata justification for what they were doing. You can distort anything if you want to. And so Hinduism is not, I mean, look what people have done to Jesus. So,
So the last question from Ryan, and then I'll give it to you for closing. But this is a good one. Are there particular paths of Hindu yoga and maybe broader Hinduism that are extremely conducive to the standard experience of being an American citizen in the 21st century?
Good. That's a great
Forms of
question.
government, economy, and your perspective, please, sir, according to your knowledge after a lifetime of academic and experiential study pursuit, please share.
I
Thank you,
think,
Ryan, for the question.
People have asked me, ever since I published American Veda, why did Americans embrace these teachings so much? And I hinted at it before. Americans are, there's a closed-minded, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, anti-anything different from oneself element in American life. We still see that. Every guru who ever came here had suffered abuse by people, who thought they were a threat to American life and Christianity and all that. But there's all the opposite kind of American who's open-minded, who's curious, who will see a stranger or somebody who's different and say, oh, what can I learn from that person? And those people went to see the gurus. They went in 1893 to see Vivekananda. They go now to see whoever shows up. And those people will embrace something if it works, if it has value in their lives. And that's what the aspects of Hindu Dharma that had most practical value and were most compatible with a empirical, scientific, evidence-based approach were Vedanta, philosophy, and yoga practices and priests. So those two streams of Hindu Dharma, Vedanta and yoga, are the ones that had the biggest impact. And also, Vaishnavism through Srila Prabhupada and some of the others, but it was mainly that sort of practical Vedanta, practical yoga that has had the biggest impact.
Great. One more time, I'm going to drop the information for the course in the chat. You can get more details and even course learning outcomes and objectives, and in case you want some extra follow-up and then we'll send a recording of this webinar to everyone who registered. You get an email with a link to register and all of that as well. Rakeshji, I think we'll try and connect you to Philji offline. Glad that you're a student, HOA student, and writing semi-fictional novel with the central theme of dharmic influences. We'll connect you offline. Thank you. And with that, Phil Goldberg, my pleasure hosting you as always. Closing thoughts, send us away, but make sure you register all of our attendees for something in the next webinar, this course, the certificate program, plug in, and be a part of how Hindu Dharma transformed America.
Yes, I would encourage everybody, please, take the course. We'll have a great time. You'll learn a lot. And I think you'll find it extremely valuable. And I hope to see many of you when we start the course.
Great. And with that, thank you, everyone. Namaste. Dhanyawad. See you next time.
Thank you, Ankor.
Thank you, Phil.